Hi and welcome to this tutorial. It's the latest tutorial from the latest batch of ABRSM. This is grade 8 piano. It's the first movement from the Sonata in A flat by Haydn. Wow, this was really quite the challenge to do at very, very short notice, very quickly, because yeah, like I think I said in the comments, the description for the video for the performance, really I'd want to spend a long time constantly tweaking this until it sort of got more and more polished. Actually today, the day after I recorded this, I then went onto YouTube and searched for people who've performed it, and I'm really pleased that I hadn't looked before, because it's full of, you know, people in competitions, top level competitions playing it, where it's unbelievably polished. And it's like, yeah. So the thing with this piece is any sort of technical issues, and it's unbelievably exposed, unless you play it in a really, really boring way. So like, you know, I was sort of wondering in my mind, right, what am I going to cover in this tutorial for the Haydn? And so I'm going to try not to talk too much, because, you know, you presumably don't just want to see me talking, you want to see some playing, you want to hear some stuff. But at the same time, I think it really is worth sort of asking some questions about interpreting Haydn, and sort of exploring some of these issues, because Haydn is very, very tricky in all kinds of ways, because you know, there's a lot of people who believe that we should try and perform this kind of music in an authentic way, in the kind of way that Haydn or someone in his time might have tried to play it. There's so much written about this, there's so much academic research, there's so much, but the problem is that when it comes to Haydn, it's all very contradictory and we don't really know. And so, for example, things like ornamentation. To find information about how to do ornaments like trills, mordents, all these kinds of things in Haydn is a minefield, because there is no one really good source on the internet that I can find that basically says this is what you do with Haydn. It's very complicated. On the one hand, he was massively influenced by by a book by C.P. Bach wrote, where he codified and sort of said, when you see a mordent, when you see an inverse mordent, when you see this, this is what you do. And apparently Haydn was very influenced by this, but he wasn't just influenced by this, he also bent these rules and did things loads of other ways. And we know this because of clocks that I think Haydn was involved in designing. And these were clocks that played little tunes when you know, the hour came round or whatever. And so the clocks were programmed to do Haydn's music, and you can hear how the ornamentation was done, which sort of gives you clues as to how you're supposed to do these things. Anyway, to try and cut a long story short, if you're playing Bach, it's relatively straightforward to see something and look things up in C.P. Bach's table and go, this is how you're supposed to do it. And in Haydn, it's so much more complicated. It's really a minefield. So that there's a lot of different ways that you can do ornamentation. But I'll come on to this in a minute. Now, again, like similarly to what I was saying about the Bach, there's many, many ways that we can choose to interpret this piece. Now, personally, I tried to sort of really get to the spirit, the heart, the sort of the essence of the classical style, the late Baroque, the early classical style that Haydn was writing in. So, for example, and a lot of professionals do play it with tons of pedals. So you could. Now, the pedal wasn't around in Haydn's time. I don't think the piano was even an instrument that Haydn was writing for at this time. Now, Haydn did start writing for the forte piano, which was able to go loud and quiet, and was just just on the brink of being used seriously by composers at this time. But I don't think this piece was written for a fortepiano, and that's because I went and had a look in the Urtext. By the way, so a lot of teachers will go on and on about Urtext editions. My teacher drummed it into me, you must use the Urtext. Urtext is German. It sort of means the original source, and it's sort of like you'll find editions, like copies of Haydn books that say Urtext on them. And the whole point of them is that you basically see the closest thing to what the composer wrote in his original manuscript. This is just rubbish. The ABRSM thing that here is absolutely appalling. Again, for reasons that I'll go into later. But so much of what is on here is not what Haydn wrote. But I'll come to that in a minute. So anyway, to try and cut a long story short, Haydn did not write for a piano. In fact, it's arguable about whether he wrote this for an instrument that could even play loudly and quietly. So probably wrote it for a clavichord, maybe. But I feel like you need a PhD. It's specialising in Haydn to really know a lot of this stuff. But I've spent hours for this. Looking on academic journals, looking in books, but stopping short of actually buying incredibly expensive books dedicated to Haydn ornamentation and stuff. But anyway, so you could play it with pedal. You can go. So that's all pedal, and the moment you hear that is not a sound that Haydn would ever have recognised. Now, it's not my taste, and I wouldn't recommend for my students to learn it this way. Although I would never say to them, you cannot do it this way, because music just isn't like this. It's we can do it however we want. But, what can I say? That there's going to be a lot of purists who believe that you shouldn't use any pedal, who believe that if you're going to play Haydn, you want to make it sound as close as possible to the kind of instrument that Haydn would have had in his time. But then my thought on this, and a lot of people's thought on this, is if you feel that strongly about it, go and play it on the harpsichord, go play it on the clavichord, play it possibly on a fortepiano. Just don't even bother playing it on the piano. If you're going to play it on the piano, make the most of what the piano can offer you. These are really complicated issues, People can debate this. You could stick two people in a room, one of whom is a purist, one of whom is like a concert pianist who likes playing on the Steinway and likes using loads of pedal, and they can argue over this. Now, my thoughts are that if you're gonna do this for a grade 8 exam, you've got to ask yourself, why are you taking a grade 8 exam? And I would argue that one of the points of taking an exam is that you are challenging yourself to learn. You're challenging yourself to become better, and you're basically not only learning pieces and getting better, but you're learning about different styles, and you're learning about the conventions of different styles. So I would encourage my students, even if they start off preferring that with the pedal, I would encourage them to start with as little pedal as possible, because that's kind of the whole point of learning this. The whole point of learning an A-list piece in grade 8 is to learn about different styles, and we don't want to. I think there's not much point learning it in a romantic. Let's learn it in Haydn style. Now, I am using pedal. I am cheating, if you want to call it that. So I'm going, And here, I just put a dab of pedal on. And I put a dab of pedal on in the trills. I like it with a dab of pedal on the trills. I like the colour. I like the colour of trills with a little bit of pedal. Some people might get upset about that and go, no, you shouldn't have that. But you know, it's all a question of taste. Anyway, so yes, pedal. You could use pedal. And by the way, when I started learning this a few days ago, I did start off going. I did start off with pedals, thinking I liked it, and then I gradually eased off. And it's, you know, it's a little bit of an acquired taste not using pedal. But after a few days, I thought, no, I prefer it without the pedal. Now, for quite a while, I was playing all of this with pedal. Whatever it is. So it's the bit going from bar 51. And then I realised, actually no, I kind of prefer it without the pedal. So again, halfway through bar 51. It takes better technique. One of the things about pedal, which is one of the reasons why it's so tempting to just use it in a lot of places, is it hides weaknesses in technique. So it's tempting just to stick down the pedal to hide the bits that you can't do so well. Yeah, I don't recommend that. Anyway, you know, I could go on and on and on. I could comb through the whole piece purely talking about pedal, and I could comfortably talk about that for hours, about where you want to have pedal, where you don't want to have pedal. I'm gonna cut it short there, not do that, because I think that if you're more interested in that, talk about it with your teacher, or as I'm always saying, I am available for online lessons. But you know, this is an area with a lot of subtlety. I'm going to leave pedaling for now. You know, all I'm going to say is that some people will say you shouldn't use any pedaling whatsoever, and I'm just saying use dabs of it where you absolutely have to. So, ornamentation. This is one of the most important things here. God, you know, I went and listened to a lot of recordings of people doing this, and there's so many people. There's so many different ways that people are using ornamentation in this, and wherever possible, I've looked to C.P. Bach and his list of rules about when you see this ornament, you do this, which we know that Haydn was influenced by. And in certain moments where it clearly just doesn't work, then I've tweaked it. I think this is the best approach. Now, by the way, I don't know where ABRSM got this edition from, but I think it's very old-fashioned. I had a look at IMSLP at all the different editions that are up there, and I think that whoever edited this didn't even bother looking at any recent Urtext. Well, okay, a source manuscript copy. Well, okay. Anyway, so for example, nobody, pretty much absolutely nobody, and I've listened to so many recordings now of this, a lot of them today after I recorded it, nobody does this. Almost nobody does that. In the Urtext that I've seen, there is what's called the Haydn Ornament, which is basically a turn on the first note. The Haydn Ornament, it's either a turn or it's an inverse mordant. And almost everybody who plays this does. Almost everyone. So you're missing something very, very crucial on this first note, because nobody just goes. So something that I should point out as well, and I don't know that I've made this kind of clear enough, in other tutorials that I've done, is that I think, you know, there's a lot of feeling that classical music, you've got to do what's written on the page. Now, it depends on what you're playing, and I think that there's a lot more room for freedom than people think. And it does actually say here, because I've just I'm only just now looking at the fine print here, and it says the only dynamic, it's at the bottom of the page, the source manuscript copy, the only dynamic marks are the forte signs in bar 75. So basically every single dynamic that you see here, every single forte and piano and crescendo and decrescendo are all put here just on this edition, which really actually quite annoys me, because it's very, very difficult for me to read this and not be influenced by what they're suggesting for you. But Haydn didn't write any of these markings, which is kind of annoying. Anyway, so if you decide to go, you know, and it's not marked, and that inverse mordent is not marked on your ABRSM copy, the earth is not going to fall in, and you were expected to just embellish, improvise, and put your own ornaments where you thought was appropriate. So if you change the dynamics that are marked on here, if you do different ornamentation, any decent ABRSM examiner will not bat an eyelid, as long as it's tasteful. So in my opinion, you have to go, for one thing, everyone else does, and I know that shouldn't be a good reason, but at the same time, it's like without fail, everybody does that, and it's in the Urtext. So I'd feel very uncomfortable playing, because that's just not what you do. And then, similarly, a similar thing in the third beat of the first bar, where you've got this appoggiatura. Almost nobody goes, which is what ABRSM, what the editorial marking is here. So they're suggesting, and I knew straight away instinctively that just did not feel right. When I was first looking and following their markings, that just does not intuitively feel right. And when you actually look in C.P. Bach's code of, well, what do you do when you've got an appoggiatura which is like a semiquaver, which then it's a quick, that it's basically, there are two types of appoggiaturas. There are quick appoggiaturas and there are slow appoggiaturas. So slow is like the one that it's got here, where it kind of has half the note length, and then you've got the quick type, which is, and that is just so much more intuitive that that's what it should be. Now, oh my god, this tied trill has caused me so much, not quite to the level of sleepless nights, but I wanted to know what do you do with a note that is tied to a trill? And basically C.P. Bach, again, in his very influential book where he writes what you do with these things, he's very, very clear what you do with it, and he writes quite a lot about it. So we're at bar 2, we've got the D flat, and then what he says is that here's the second beat, you're still tied, and then resolve it. That's what C.P. Bach says that you do. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, except he says more about it. He says you've really got to make it kind of snap. It's got to be very, very quick. 1, 1, 2. So make it really, really brisk. So 1, 2. Now, something else that he says, and I can't remember where I read this somewhere, and I can't remember if it was C.P. Bach or Haydn, but someone basically said this, that in the early days of the fortepiano, they said, basically, it's very, very difficult to play these tied trills on a fortepiano, because, oh gosh, how much do I go into? Basically, Baroque music, it's driven by appoggiaturas, which are basically a dissonance that resolve onto the chord tone. So this is like an appoggiatura, and it resolves. And whenever you have a non-chord tone, that is strong. It's a strong, loud note, and then it goes softer and quieter when it resolves. So unresolved, resolved, and it goes quieter. Now the thing with these little trills is it's got to go loud, loud, and then quiet because it's resolved. And apparently this was quite difficult on the early forte pianos, and probably still quite difficult on modern pianos. But so what you've got is, and then appoggiatura, loud, loud, quiet. So loud, quiet, and then loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud, quiet. Because every time it resolves, it's got to go down, and this is really sort of what drives, well, yeah, it's not really Baroque, it's Baroque classical, but you know, this is what drives so much Baroque and early classical music, especially, you know, Mozart as well. And anyway, so we want and hopefully you can hear that every time I resolve a non-chord tone, it gets quieter. It's not this. You know, that I can't even play it. I can't even play it that way. It's just, it feels horrible, and it's like just you know, pushing against the grain for me. So it's not. So it's not. Yeah, it's just not. It's no, I'm really exaggerating it there. So, you know, every time you look at any ornament, chances are that it's some kind of non-chord tone, appoggiatura, that is then resolving. So let's look for more ornamentation. So here I'm on bar 5, and then it's strong, weak. So it's not only like written appoggiaturas, but this, the beginning of bar 6 is essentially an appoggiatura, even though it's not written that way. And then it gets quieter, which is why they put that diminuendo there, but anyway. And then quieter. You get the idea. So again, I could talk loads and loads about that, but I'm just going to drop that in there for now, which is every time that you spot a non-chord tone that is resolving to a chord tone, that is loud, quiet, and it's acting as an appoggiatura that resolves. Way too much to go into in a short tutorial. So this is basically what drives ornamentation. There's a lot of places where I think it's worth just listening to what other people do and bearing in mind that what ABRSM suggests is not always the best thing to do. Like, for example, bar 23. For a long time, now for as long as possible, I tried not to listen to any other versions of anybody else playing this. I wanted to form my own impression of this. And so from bar 22, 1, 2, and that just felt like an unnecessarily long time to wait before the trill. I'm going to go from bar 21. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, that just seemed unnecessarily long. And so what I felt intuitively I wanted to do, I wanted to start the trill after 1 beat, not after 2 beats, which is what ABRSM is suggesting here. So basically what I felt like was 1, from bar 21. 1, 2, something like that. And then, lo and behold, after a little bit of time, I went off and listened to loads of other people playing it, and almost everybody does it after one beat, which is what I felt intuitively I kind of really wanted to do with it. Yeah, there were some other little tricky bits of ornamentation, but I'm going to try not to go into it too much. I think basically you can have a listen to my performance of this, but to get inspiration for what you want to do with the ornamentation, but do not take my word for it, because like I said, I feel like you need a PhD in Haydn ornamentation to really get any kind of reasonably informed opinion about what to do with these things. Listen to mine, but also go and listen to lots of other versions. But I will tell you some things about how I believe ornamentation should not be done. But having said this, there are many, many professional pianists who I massively respect, who I believe are doing it wrong, like really wrong. So for example, this is like bar 2. Bar 2, you will hear so many different ways that people do that trill on the second beat. So I'm doing that trill the CP Bach way, which is something I'm going to take it very slowly, so you can hear how it's broken down. Something like that. So now that's how CP Bach says these things should be done. Now these are some of the ways that professionals do this. And then, so 1, 2. Now this is just completely wrong to me, because over and over again we're just told that this isn't how ornaments are done, that they come before the beat. Although, to be fair, by the time you get to Haydn, we then learn that sometimes Haydn actually does do ornamentation before the beat. So it really does become a bit of a minefield. But here's the reason why I think it shouldn't be done that way. Why are we told that in CP Bach's time ornamentation was on the beat and not before it? It's because the dissonance was part of the emotion. So if we go, it gives you more emotion than this is, and it's over, but just gives you that extra suspension, which gives you that little bit more emotion, and it's just so much nicer to just keep that dissonance, that resolution to the chord tone, just going that little bit longer, which is why C.P. Bach writes that you do it that way. To my mind, you need an overwhelmingly good reason to go. And I don't see an overwhelmingly good reason to do it. I think a lot of professionals who play this just understandably did not want to read endless amounts of sources trying to figure out how to do ornaments, and just went, I don't know. Which is sort of how you do ornaments in the Romantic era. I don't think so. I prefer. Anyway, so another thing that people do is similar. So instead of they'll do similar, but they go. So they put the first C with the left hand on the second beat. It's slightly better because it sounds slightly more from this time period, but again, it's losing that suspension too early for me personally. I don't like it. I don't like it. But you will hear professionals do both those versions. Very few professionals actually do it the way that I've read you should do it. But what's interesting is that when you listen to professional performers who are playing this on a forte piano, they do it this way, and that says to me that these guys know what they're doing. If you are playing a forte piano, you have researched the hell out of this stuff. You probably have a PhD on ornamentation in Haydn. And if people are playing this on a forte piano or on a clavichord, going, which is generally what they do on that instrument, that says to me that these people have researched the heck out of this, and I'm going to trust them over pianists who are more used to playing romantic repertoire. So, now, maybe you don't really care. Maybe I'm being overly fussy about all of these things. But, it's a grade 8 exam. Why not use this as an opportunity to find out, well, how do we think that Haydn did this? How do we think that people would have done in Haydn's time? Why be lazy about researching all this kind of stuff, And there's one more way of doing it. Now, I generally do not listen to Haydn virtually ever, but I love the pianist Marc-Andre Hamelin. And because I love this pianist, I happen to have his recordings of the Haydn piano sonatas, which I do listen to from time to time. And it's a beautiful CD. And so straight away when I was looking at this, I thought, I'm going to have to look at his CD after a while and see what he does. And then what he does is he just ignores the tie. He goes, which struck me as a bit odd. And I don't know why he does that. He must have very good reasons for doing that. I have no idea what they are. But, like I said, the people who play this on the forte piano, who really must know what they're doing, go... and that's good enough for me. Because if you're going to play this in an exam, to an examiner, why not try and get some authenticity to this, Anyway, so, God, that's just me talking about one ornament in the second bar. I could go on and on again for ages and ages about ornamentation in Haydn. If you're interested to find out more, get a good teacher who knows this stuff. I am available for online lessons. Or you perhaps don't want to care about it all that much, and a lot of people aren't going to care about it all that much. But, why not? Why not just try and, figure it out? But, you also don't be scared. Be a little bit apprehensive, but don't be completely intimidated to try putting your own ornamentation in places. It helps if you listen to a lot of CDs of Haydn and stuff from around that time. And it helps if you read the book by C.P. Bach, which basically explains ornamentation. It's a bit above and beyond, But if you really like this style of music, why not use this as a springboard to look into it? Anyway, so here's what I'm going to talk about. Now, I mainly play romantic music. I mainly play Rachmaninoff, Liszt, Ravel, all this kind of stuff. So I'm slightly out of my comfort zone playing Haydn. And I realised that, wow, I sort of started experimenting with sort of new ways of playing because I feel like this first movement starts off very, very playful. I think it's very important that when we start playing this, we don't just go, right, I'm going to be very correct. And get really sort of, just playing the notes, just pressing levers. I hear playfulness. This is very, very playful. And then... But basically, yeah, I'm hearing the character in there. There's a lot of character. And to get this character, I don't think we want to make all the things, all the scale bits, I don't think are hyper legato. I want to go for what some people sort of call, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's like a pearly tone, where all the notes, and I'm not very good at that because I don't do that a lot, because I don't play a lot of Baroque music and classical music. But so what you do with this is you basically flick every single note, so they're all separated. So basically, I could have played it safe. I could have played very safe with this, which most pianists do, by the way. Most professional pianists do not try and do all this kind of stuff. They just play hyper legato. So this is me playing safe. And then playing safe. What was it? Because legato scales are much easier. But if I go from bar 3 and then that's a lot riskier, because I don't generally do that. I don't. It's not a technique you tend to use a lot in romantic music. So, but you know, I put myself out there. I'm basically putting myself out there. You know, trying to play in a style that is a little bit out of my comfort zone. Now, something else is that even when you're not flicking it to make everything super short, you still want to make everything very, very even. One thing that helps is to move your fingers a lot, which is the opposite of what I teach my students when we're learning romantic music. When we're learning romantic music, basically I say, when we're playing legato, we generally move the fingers as little as possible so that we get economy of movement. But if we want to play in this sort of more brilliant, very defined, very articulated, very even style, it helps to really move our fingers a lot. So, like, where's that bit with where the left hand goes? There's one bit in particular that I find really tricky. Something like, what is that? Where's it gone? It's disappeared. Yes, bar 18. So, yeah, it's very, very tricky, this bar. So bar 18. Just this. Very, very hard. So I find that either trying to flick your fingers in or make them move a lot. Because if you're not careful, it just goes, oh no, that wasn't bad. But it gets very blurry. Let's go from, and then, very, very tough. So something else that I recommend all the time when we're trying to make sort of very, very even sounds, practice this little bit here in shifting accents. So, and then in threes, and then in fours, and then shift it, and so on and so on. And it's really important that it's loud, very, very quiet, loud, very, very quiet, and really exaggerate this. Now, by the time you go through all those different permutations, it's going to be a lot easier to go. And you're going to want to do that kind of practice with these shifting accents all over the place, all over anything that's difficult. Like for example, bar 42. 42 is very tricky, and I actually would change the fingering that they've given you here. So that kind of practicing in this bar, etc., etc. And then in threes, and then shift, and then shift, then in and so on and so on. And then by the time you've done all those, and so on, you know, you're going to have something a lot clearer. God, I mean, really, you know, I could go on for hours and hours about all the pitfalls and all the little issues, but I think hopefully I've whetted your appetite with some of the really kind of big important issues with this. A lot of this is really about the trills. Trills are helped. Maybe if you rotate your wrist as well. But also, you know, you need to be very, very relaxed as well for these kinds of ornaments. If you're tense, it's much, much harder to make very, very quick trills and very quick articulation. Another thing to bear in mind is that when you're doing trills, when you're doing very, very, very quick trills, you don't really want to push all the way down to the bottom of the key. It's a lot easier if you just kind of flick it, so that you're not pushing all the way down. If you're trying to go all the way down, it's exhausting, and that's not really what you want to do, because so much of the time, like with the tied ones, you want this very light. This is part of the reason why trills that happened after a tie were very, very difficult to do softly in Haydn's day, because there was no escapement mechanism or catchment or whatever it's called, which you have in modern pianos since Pleyel. Now, I'm not going to go into that now. You can Google that if you're interested in that. But in Haydn's day, forte pianos, if you did like trills, you actually did have to push all the way down. We're lucky now that you don't. That once you've hit a key beyond a certain point, the hammer will keep going down and you can let it come back to the top. So you can do this instead of having to push all the way down. Make use of that for these trills instead of having to push it all the way down to the key bed. Experiment with your own dynamics. Don't just blindly follow the dynamics here. A lot of the time I really do not agree with the dynamics that they put here. They actually quite annoy me. Anyway, I think we've sort of come to the end of this. Basically, my phone only comfortably records in 40 minutes chunks, otherwise it can have problems. So, oh goodness, I mean, I don't know if I've really been able to give you enough information, but you know, hopefully I've whetted your appetite and possibly inspired you to either ask your teacher for more about these kinds of issues. Maybe you'd like to approach me for lessons. Maybe it's going to inspire you to go and listen to loads of other people playing it. Maybe it's going to inspire you to watch other YouTube tutorials on this. Maybe you're going to go and check out stuff that people have said about CP Bach's ornaments and stuff like that. But anyway, I've really ended up enjoying learning this piece a lot, even though this isn't normally the kind of thing that I like. Also, by the way, Marc-Andre Hamelin's recording of this sonata, the second movement, oh my God, it is beautiful. It is so, so gorgeous. I've heard other people play, but Marc-Andre Hamelin just absolutely nails the second movement. It's just absolutely beautiful. Do go check it out. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Do feel free to, you know, contact me if you have any questions or leave comments or whatever, and do subscribe, and watch out for more tutorials and more performances of these grade 8 pieces and the other stuff that I'm recording. Anyway, thanks for checking this out. Thanks for watching the tutorial, and see you on the next one. Bye.